Welcome to the CrossKnowledge podcast. Here we discuss the trends, opportunities, and challenges of corporate digital learning. Let's meet today's host.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the CrossKnowledge podcast. I'm Renan, and I'll be your host today. The Human Advantage is a series of the CrossKnowledge podcast where we explore the pivotal role of humans in driving organizational success. The idea is to hold candid conversations with business leaders and experts who have demonstrated a deep commitment to fostering a more human workplace. Today, we're excited to welcome Sarnjit Kaur, Chief People Officer at Cox Automotive, a leader in the automotive sector with over 3,000 employees in the UK, Europe, Brazil, and Australia. Sarnjit is dedicated to fostering a positive workplace culture that truly supports employee well-being and drives performance. She's been leading exciting initiatives like a well-being group focused on men's mental health, so crucial in an industry where 80% of the workforce is male. This group provides employees with a safe space to talk about their challenges, seek support, and learn ways to manage stress. She has also launched a Neurodiversity group to celebrate and support diverse talents within the company, fostering a more inclusive and innovative workplace. And let's not forget the Make Your Mark program, which empowers employees to connect with causes they are passionate about. This initiative has been a hit, allowing everyone to contribute to their communities in meaningful ways. In this episode, we'll explore the strong connection between company culture and business performance. Sarnjit, thank you so much for joining us today. It is a true pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, Renan. I'm looking really forward to
it. Great. So for starters, can you start by sharing with us a little bit about your journey and why you think organizational culture is so important for business success?
Of course, yeah. So I think organizational culture, if you ask anybody what it means, you'll probably get a whole host of different answers. I think for me and my journey, which hasn't always been in a HR field, it has been in operational roles as well. And, when I reflect on the word, what has culture meant to me, both as an employee and in HR, it's really how my organization has treated me, how it feels to work here, how the behaviors and the culture and the way people work, that all contributes to the culture. But I think for me personally, it's also about, what does it feel like for Sarnjit to work here? How is she treated? Is she listened to? So from an employee perspective, I always think about it's the environment that we create for our team members, and how should we always look to improve that environment where they feel safe, they're trusted, they're empowered, and, they can also be their self.
Yeah, it's very interesting because it's pretty much about a state of being, right? Like in the organization, right?
Most definitely, because I think, I always describe as I've transitioned into leadership roles, and certainly in HR, I always say, well, HR, like all leaders, you are the custodians of the culture. How I behave, how I turn up to meetings, how I treat people, and how I make people feel, that does define leaders in an organization, but it's not just for HR. I think, everybody should be the custodians of the culture, because we've all got the opportunity, I think, to shape and embrace that culture. I always say to my team, how we behave, how we show up, how we role model, you're role modeling that every day for your culture across the organization.
Yeah. So, and as a Chief People Officer, how do you make sure that the cultural initiatives you lead are aligned with the business goals? How does that happen?
I think for HR, HR as a profession has evolved over the years. I think years ago it was being seen as like just the hiring, the firing, I very much see HR as being absolutely strategic for the business to reach their goals. So, the business has got its operational plan, its strategic plan. We are obviously plug into that plan. But from a HR perspective, I think, aligning the culture, it is that stakeholder management with the organization. It's understanding their goals, but it's also understanding, well, what's the culture and environment, and what's the culture we've got to create for us to be able to help the business deliver what they need to deliver. And, if I was to sort of, look at some of the key strategic things from a culture perspective that I focus on as a CPO, I would always talk about things like well-being, learning and development, creating that culture that cares first and foremost, particularly after COVID, and, everybody wants to be safe. Psychological safety and how we treat our people has got to be our number one priority. And I always think then the results thereafter will follow. If you treat your people well, you create conditions where they can grow, develop and learn, because everybody wants to develop. Yeah. Some people might not want to in terms of from a promotional perspective, but they still might want to enhance their skills and their experience. As a CPO, I always think my role is about creating those levers around development, growth, well-being, and creating an inclusive environment where everybody feels they're valued.
Yeah. This is really inspiring, because actually sometimes I see very often when I speak with when I see some initiatives that like are culture-based initiatives that really aims to promote culture and or build a company culture. One of the main struggles is that is when it comes to evaluating the results of those initiatives. And you touched upon this on your answer, like the results will follow. How do you assess the impact of these initiatives?
Yeah, I think there's lots of ways that you can assess initiatives. Yeah, so common ways that organizations use our surveys. We use best company surveys, we do pulse surveys, and it's really interesting. I've just come off my bi-weekly team call, and we were just talking about landing our pulse survey. Any surveys that we've done that sort of go out to ask people how they feel, would they recommend Cox Automotive, what are the opportunities for improvement? First and foremost, we always get a really, really good sort of response rate. We're always tracking in the 80% sort of mark, which is really good. But stepping aside the traditional surveys, I always say to myself and the board, you've got to have that listening culture and that listening environment. So, I can talk about ERGs in a moment, but, if I take my role, being visible and, when we say listening, but actively listening to your team members, and it doesn't always have to be in formal settings. So, for example, I do try and get out to many of our operational sites as I can. It doesn't always happen, but where I can, I think anybody in that leadership role has got so many opportunities, outside formal settings such as surveys. We have a culture and engagement team here, for example. Yeah. So whilst we have a lot of formal meetings with them, I also have a lot of informal catch-ups with them, because that's the time where I think sometimes, and I know this from my operational days, the best ideas come from the people. So, you talked about neurodiversity earlier on. So we've got a lot of ERGs. Neurodiversity was an idea that has come from our team members, because they were saying to us, they've got so many family and friends who are impacted. And, being neurodivergent means that leaders might have to adapt their leadership style with them. And my team members were telling me that we haven't got enough knowledge about people who are, neurodivergent. How can we help them? So I think coming back to answer your question, listening, surveys, the one thing I always say is being visible.
Yeah.
being visible is the number one thing that every single leader in any organization can do. Because I always think you always pick up those 1 or 2 nuggets, which helps to make your organization a better place for its people.
That's really inspiring. Really, really inspiring. I love the initiative of like preparing. Like we need to have this understanding of neurodiversity, so then we can help them as well. So then we can make like a better workplace for them, so then they can also perform. That's really inspiring. So you touched on some initiatives that you led. So the neurodiversity program. I also mentioned like the Make or Mark program, and also like the well-being group. Can you talk about a little bit of these programs and maybe others as well, and how you can also share with us how they helped build this positive culture that boosts performance?
Yeah, most definitely. So I touched upon the fact that we are a global organization. So we've got a big market in the UK. We also have markets in Germany, France, and Italy. Now, as you'll know, people in different markets will have different needs. Yeah. So one of the things that we've been really proud, we've had this for a number of years. We've got a European and culture and engagement team. Yeah. So that will be a group of people from all markets where we talk about how can we, it's about top down, but also bottom up, listening to the ideas of our team members. Following COVID, all organizations, have put in a lot of resources in the inclusion agenda. I can say that we were already on that sort of bus well before COVID. So if I look at our employee resource groups, we were always really mature, with one of them called, which I'll talk about, Women with Drive. You mentioned automotive is 80% male. The industry over the years has been predominantly male. And we launched, I think, Women with Drive nearly over 10 years ago in the US, where it was always about our females and our males, because we need them as advocates to come together with, how do we make this a safe space for women? How do we get women in leadership roles? How do we get women to have their voice and feel comfortable around that table? So I think our employee resource groups naturally over the last 3 years, this is something I'm really proud of. They've really developed. So we've got Women with Drive. We've got our Mosaic, which looks after our ethnic minority sort of programs, and it puts yourself in their shoes. We've got Pride. We've just launched Neurodiversity this year, so that's very much in its infancy. And then the other one, which we launched last year, this was on the back of COVID, is we actually pulled together all of our well-being champions into a bit of an ERG. And that's been really fulfilling to see, because that's the one where it has locked men's mental health. We know men don't talk about their mental health. And it's really inspired people to come forward and share, what support they want from our organisation, which we don't normally talk about. Yeah. So I think our ERGs are really, really well established. I think, this all comes to me about creating that culture where people do feel they've got a safe space. And if I take it a step back, I'm a female, I'm an ethnic minority. I have had experiences where I know what it's like to feel excluded. So I always think in my role, I've got that platform to help and support this business so that nobody feels like that in any sort of, with any protected characteristic, whether they're male, female. I think from my experience, that really influences me to say, well, these things, they can't just be a talking shop. You've got to get action on the back of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's great because actually something that I thought, because actually sometimes there are like some trends, right? Well, sometimes, it's a trend to talk about diversity, but actually what you're saying is that, no, I'm not following trends. I'm just looking at the people who work for my organization, and I'm providing this platform for them so that they can work better, so that they can, really so it's not you're not following trends. You're just like making what you think what is correct like for them. So this is so great. Congratulations.
Listening to the insights of the people, and I can share with you, before this call, I had a call with one of my colleagues who's based in the Germany market. So one of the things that we trialed, and again, I was supported and I've championed, is we've called it, it's a really great program called Level Up. Yeah. So English isn't the first language for some of our colleagues who are based in Germany markets, France and Spain. So we piloted this year. And like I said, I've literally come off the call. It's been so successful because it's an idea that's come up from the European and the culture engagement team, but it's giving all of these team members who have taken part the confidence to turn up on Teams calls and get their views across, get their ideas across. They've now come to me to say, look, can we roll this out across other markets? Because Sarnjit, you don't realize if English isn't your first language, how much it can hold you back from contributing. So it's a really, really simple idea. Yes, it links in with learning and development, but it also links to me from an inclusion and a diversity perspective, because I can give them the tools to help them with their language so that they feel really fulfilled in the workplace. So I think, coming back to the point, it's great having these ERGs, but what I like to see is tactical actions like the Level Up program being tested, being piloted, and then rolled out. So, when I've just said to this colleague, we will absolutely roll it out to another 24 people in the German market. She's come off this call skipping because she knows it's going to help her colleagues.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's great that, as you just said, like it all starts with when you listen to people, the people, and then you get the ideas, like what you have to do. And then that's really, really inspiring. So you touched upon this very briefly in the beginning about like the relationship of leadership and business culture. And we have seen like over the past years, like a bigger focus on middle managers, like in the past years. How do you see middle managers contributing to a positive culture?
I think first and foremost, I think your middle managers are probably one of the most critical roles in any organization. If I reflect on my own career and my first sort of days in a contact center where I was looking after, and I was in that middle manager role, you've got your own workload to do. You have your own actions and objectives. You've got a team to look after. Since COVID, you've got well-being, you've got mental health. I always say this, middle managers, I think, are absolutely the glue in any organization. And it's really interesting because one of the things that I've been really sort of focused on is how do you give them the skills and the capabilities to manage so many dimensions, because they can be managing performance 1 minute, they've got to be a coach, got to be a counselor. The role has so many hats. And I think just, the actual term middle manager, I feel as if it's such a broad role now, but the investment in that middle management leadership role is absolutely instrumental in delivering what's expected of the organization. And, and I will say, and this is an area where I have just sort of said, look, for my 2025, 2026 and 2027 plan, that's where I will be investing.
Oh, wow. Yeah, this is really, and we've seen this in the past few years as well, because they're not, they're not only overseeing like their team. Sometimes they need to collaborate with other managers, and sometimes they really need to understand the strategy that is coming from up the chain of command. So then like they can really execute that, and also like make sure that they are these cultural ambassadors. And I think like I really liked when you were talking about the neurodiversity group, that your team members said like, well, we need to empower like these managers to understand that, like to understand like how to cope with that. Like at some point you touched upon this, and again, it's like the middle managers, because they are the one seeing, keeping the wheels turning.
Most definitely. And anybody who's managed a team will know.
Yeah.
Everybody has different needs. Everybody learns differently. Some people are reflectors. Some people, will have different needs and different styles. And coming back to that role of the middle manager, empathy and listening. If people ask me what's the critical skill of a leader, I always start with empathy, because, there's always conflict in any workplace. And the amount of times I always say, well, if everybody had a little bit of empathy for each other and put themselves in somebody else's shoes for that 5-10 minutes, they might see things in a different perspective or a different angle.
Yeah.
So I think for me, coming back to the foundations of listening, taking that time to know individuals, because, how much do you really know your team? Even when I talk about engagement and surveys, and I always say to my team, spend time with your teams, get to know them as individuals. And I know it's really basics in terms of what motivates people, but that trust within a team can really deliver. Yeah. It can have such a profound impact on whether somebody's engaged, whether somebody's motivated, and whether somebody ultimately delivers for themselves and for the organization.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's their close relationship between culture and business performance. Because like what you just mentioned is culture, but helping business to drive performance in the business.
Most definitely.
Yeah. So we're coming to the last question, Sarnjit. So what's the one piece of advice you would give to your L&D and HR peers who would like to work on their company culture as a way to drive business performance?
Well, that's a great question. So I don't think there's a silver bullet. I think there's lots of things. I think one of the key things, and I actually talked about this last week on an internal call about sort of my history and my journey. Yeah. And, one of the things I said I nearly had 200 people on this call, was really understand your business inside and out. Understand which market you operate in so that you understand the business, but also take time to understand people. Yeah. Nothing builds success, I don't think, quite like failure. Yeah. And resilience comes in buckets. I've had lots of setbacks. I haven't just walked into a CPO role. There's many times where I've applied for roles, I've not been successful, all because of the right reasons. I didn't have enough experience. But when I look and reflect back, I think what I've learned from those scenarios have then helped and enabled me to be a better leader. We've talked about empathy and listening a lot. And I think one of the key things I always say is, and I'm a very positive person, as you can probably see, I always think in any scenario, start with positive intent. Most people come to work to do a really, really good job. I think 99.9% of people do. So I always think start from a place of positive intent, listen, communication, understand the environment that you operate in. And, also have a bit of fun along the way. We spend so much time at work, getting to know your colleagues, getting to know the business. It all helps, I think.
Yeah, that's really, really great. Well, that's a great way to wrap up this episode. Sarnjit, thank you so much for sharing your experience and your insights with us. I think it was a very, very insightful and valuable episode. Thank you so much for that.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope to see you again for the next episode of the CrossKnowledge podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and colleagues.